I recently finished reading The Possessed by Elif Batuman. I don't physically have it in front of me because I'm going to be moving in the next month or two, and I've sort of started packing up a lot of my books early because that always takes forever. And I have way more books than I could possibly need to read in the next 2 months, so just starting to pack up now. And I packed this book away thinking like, oh, I like just read that. I'm not going to reread it before I move. Might as well pack it now. Not thinking about the fact that I hadn't put out my review yet. So I don't have it physically in front of me. It is kind of a cool cover. You can Google it if you want. The book is The Possessed by Elif Batuman, and I'm sure that's in the title of the video. So one thing to point out right away, this book is named after a less popular way of translating the title of a Fyodor Dostoevsky novel. The more popular way to translate it in recent years is Demons. I mean, that's what the actual Russian title is. Some of the early translations called it The Possessed, which, like, yeah, that, like, makes sense for what happens in the book, but that's not what he called it. He called it Demons. Anyways, that's worth noting because this author also has a another book that shares a title with a Dostoevsky novel, and I think that's a cute little thing. She has not kept doing that. She's put out another book since then that has a totally original title. But yeah, so this book is a memoir. It follows the author's experiences going to grad school for Russian literature, and that was really interesting for me because this is almost sort of like an alternative version of me. What I have in common with this author is that I started out my undergrad studying linguistics and Russian. Elif Batuman did the same thing. The difference is I completed my degree in linguistics and Russian. She ended up switching after I think like a semester or a year. I don't know. It was right at the start of the book. I don't remember exactly how long, but she very quickly switched to literature and Russian, and then ended up going to grad school for comparative literature, focusing specifically on Russia. Whereas like I said, I stuck with linguistics, but also still Russian. Did take some Russian literature classes, just didn't major in that, and then I didn't go to grad school. I'm currently working as a teacher, which I'm glad I made that choice, but it is interesting to read about like this alternative version of me that could have been, because for a while I was thinking about going to grad school specifically for comparative literature because one of my goals is I want to get into doing literary translation, and like there's really no money in that unless you're like translating multiple books per year by like best-selling authors, which like that's not, I want to translate things that I'm personally excited about regardless of whether they're going to make money, so it's never going to be my living, you know. And because of that I decided not to specifically go to school for that. I was like, I'll just, do some teaching, maybe do some other random stuff at various other points in my life, and do literary translation on the side. But there is like an alternate version of me that went to grad school for comparative literature, and probably would have specifically focused on Russian literature, and that is exactly what this author did. So this is a memoir about her experiences. The subtitle of the novel, so it's called The Possessed, but the subtitle is, I think, actually, let me Google this because I don't physically have the book in front of me, but it was something, Adventures with Russian Books and the People Who Read Them, and that's what it is. So it is a series of vignettes. There's one like longer story that's broken up into parts interspersed throughout the novel, but it's interspersed between these like much shorter vignettes about various experiences she had studying Russian literature in grad school and meeting just the insane people that choose to do that. And then the longer story that's broken up into I think 3 parts in between those shorter vignettes is about a summer that she spent in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. And that was also like this book was like written specifically for me. It's crazy because that's even more specifically right up my alley. The reason I originally chose to learn Russian was that I've for a long time, like since high school, I've just been really interested in like the history and cultures of Central Asia. You know, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, mostly those three. Turkmenistan, Tajikistan's almost like a separate thing. Like it's part of that region, but they're almost like more culturally related to Persia, like Iran and Afghanistan. Anyways, not the point. The so this author, she ended up spending a summer in Uzbekistan because oh, I got sidetracked. So the original reason I wanted to learn Russian was to study that region and those languages and cultures because there's not a whole lot of resources to study that region in English, but there's a lot in Russian because most of those countries were part of the Russian Empire and then later the Soviet Union. And the Russian language is still pretty big in a couple of those countries. But yeah, so Elif Batuman spent a summer in Samarkand. That's the longer story in this book, The Possessed, and the reason that she did that is really interesting. So she's Turkish. Well, she was born and raised in the United States, but her parents are from Turkey, and she grew up speaking both Turkish and English. And she thought like it would be cool since she speaks Turkish and was learning Russian, it would be cool to learn one of those Central Asian languages because they are, with the exception of Tajik, which again is more like Persian, most of the other Central Asian languages are related to Turkish. They are Turkic languages, but they also have a lot of Russian influence, and a lot of the resources about those languages are in Russian, which again is why I initially chose to learn Russian. And but yeah, so that part of the story was really interesting. It's not like a travelogue though. It's not about like her exploring Uzbekistan or anything like that. It really just focuses on her interactions with the host family she was staying with, which was really fascinating to me because I feel like a lot of people writing about something like that would have chose to write about like, oh, here's all these interesting places I went to, these things that I saw, but no, she focuses even when this these experiences take her to very interesting locations. She doesn't focus on the location, she focuses on the people that she meets there and like how they interact. And that's I really like that about this novel. I wouldn't have thought that that's what I wanted from this novel because I do like reading travelogues, but I just really like the way that Elif Batuman captures weird personalities and like interactions between weird personalities. The titular vignette, The Possessed, is partially about her reading of Demons by Dostoevsky, which again, in very early translations, was sometimes called The Possessed by Dostoevsky. It's partially about her reading of that book, but partially also about someone she met in grad school who is sort of similar to the main character from The Possessed. And he has sort of this like just magnetic energy that like everyone who meets him falls in love with him, but he's also like very weird and nihilistic and like deeply unhappy. He's a fascinating character, and I think that vignette might have been my favorite one from the book, even above the Uzbekistan one. Yeah, I don't know. It's my thoughts on this book are a little scattered because again, it's a series of short stories, sort of cobbled together. I think a lot of them had been previously published in like newspapers and magazines. Batuman had been a contributor to a couple different newspapers prior to publishing this book, which was her first published book. And then since then, she's written two fiction novels that are almost sort of like memoirs because they're very autobiographical, but with like changed names and changed details. And again, one of those is also named after a Dostoevsky novel, The Idiot. I have that one over on my shelf. It had been there for a while, but now that I've read this book, it's jumped up quite a few spots on my to read list. Excuse me, getting over a little bit of a cold from last weekend. But yeah, I really liked this book. It Again, it was interesting to sort of almost see an alternate vision of myself had I chosen to go to grad school for comparative literature or something like that. And I think this has made me happy that I didn't make that decision, but it was still really cool to read about somebody else who did make that decision. Yeah, I definitely recommend it if you're interested in Russian literature. If you are not interested in Russian literature and you don't know anything about it, I think this book still could be interesting, but again, it's hard for me to say that objectively because this book really feels like it was written specifically for me. So yeah, this maybe was almost more of a rambling personal essay than a book review, but I am going to read some of this author's other stuff, her fiction works, and I hope that after I read those, there will be more of an actual review. This is just sort of, I'm really excited about having read this book. Yeah, again, I'll be moving soon. I'll probably put out a couple more reviews before then, and I don't know, over the summer reviews might be a little sparse. I'm going to be doing a lot more reading over the summer because again, I'm a teacher, so I'm going to be off work, but I'm also going to be going on a couple different vacations and also like putting together the new house that I'm moving into. So we'll see. But yeah, that's all.